Welcome, everybody. Thanks for taking the time to meet with us today. And this series of webinars we're doing, giving you updates on the platform and some deeper dives on some of the esoteric aspects of the platform. This specific presentation is going to be talking about GA4, Google Analytics 4, and how it relates to ActiveDEMAND. So it's a case that if you don't know me, I'm sure I've met most of you folks. I'm the CEO, founder of ActiveDEMAND, and definitely like to take doing these presentations because it lets me talk about some of the new things that are going on with the platform with everybody. So today's presentation, it's really the whole context of this presentation is to let everyone know that Google Analytics 4 is coming in like a fast-moving train, and you either get on the train or get hit by it is the reality. So I'll talk about why Google Analytics is making this change. I'll talk at a very high level the differences between Google Analytics 4 and Universal Analytics that we all know and love, and then I'll talk explicitly about how this relates to your use of ActiveDEMAND and how it relates to ActiveDEMAND. And so today the presentation is being recorded, so you'll get a link to the recording later. And if you have questions, just ask them in the chat, and we'll open up and answer questions by the end of the presentation. So it's not going to be a long presentation today, but hopefully you get lots of value out of it. So it's a case that I'm sure everyone on the call has seen the announcements, and if you're in Google Analytics 4 or adding new properties to Google Analytics rather, it's saying, you know, really pushing hard on using Google Analytics 4 as opposed to Universal Analytics. And really why, and again, this is speculation on my part, it's not, I don't I don't work for Google. And so anything that I say relating why this is, why Google has done this is speculative at best. But definitely we've seen with the world, it's definitely becoming more cognizant of privacy and the spotlights that are being shone on the big companies that are collecting all of our data, like Google and Amazon and Facebook, etc. Right? And definitely those folks in the EU are well aware of GDPR, and really it's their privacy framework for allowing people to understand what's being collected while they're on the web, and why being able to have options about selecting what they know, what's collected, and there's a couple of other concepts like subject access requests and forget-me requests, etc. So there's a bunch of stuff that was introduced in Europe under the GDPR framework, but we're also seeing similar things around the world, like in California, etc. And it was actually deemed that Universal Analytics under the GDPR framework was actually illegal. What Google was doing with putting the Google tracking scripts on the website, which everybody does, because Google Analytics, Universal Analytics has been a fantastic anonymous data aggregation platform and analysis tool. So everybody puts the tracking scripts on the website, and what was deemed as, well, you know, Universal Analytics, some of the things they were doing did not comply with the new GDPR framework. So it's the case that Google is facing litigation, and definitely they see the importance of what Google Analytics is and what it provides to the users, and has all of us users hitching ourselves to the Google wagon. So definitely they had to respond to the impending litigation. And so what I believe they did is, instead of just throwing a couple of band-aids and patching the holes that are in Google Analytics, Universal Analytics, they actually stepped back and said, well, where is this going, and what is the right thing for us to be doing? So it's been they made some. So really, the decision they made was to instead of just patching, they went to Google Analytics 4, from Universal Analytics to Google Analytics 4. And with Google Analytics 4, they made a lot of changes to the whole philosophy and sort of what data collection is in this new environment, because as you know, if you know the history of Google Universal Analytics and Google Analytics, it's had a long life. And what was true when Google bought that company that then became Google Analytics, a lot has changed in how we use the web and how we engage with digital assets, et cetera. So it was I don't know if this litigation caused Google to make change the framework, if they were already thinking about what would be the next version of Google Analytics. But let me tell you, the litigation forced their hand, and hence October 22, they start to roll out Google Analytics 4 and start giving everybody the nasty gram, saying, guess what, get on the train or you're going to be hit by it. So they stated in March of 22 of this year was that as of July 1st, 2023, so less than a year from now, when this presentation is being, when the broadcast is being presented, is that they will stop collecting data using Universal Analytics. So it's a case that really, for those folks that are taking their time and realizing this, the data is going to stop being collected in July of 2023, may think that there's a year that you have to start changing the way you do things, but the reality is they're not going to be migrating the Universal Analytics data into the new framework. So just like when you create a new web asset, and as you've done many times over the years, and you add that tracking script for Universal Analytics, that's when the data started collecting, right? You can't look in the past for before that script was on there. But the point of this story really is that even though you have the Universal Analytics tracking codes or tracking script on the websites, they're not migrating that data. So you literally have to change your tracking, or and what my recommendation is going to be is adding the Google Analytics 4 tracking in parallel to the Universal Analytics, because the tracking is going to start when you move to this new tracking system, and there's a ton of rich data that is in Universal Analytics and will still be valuable all the way up until they stop collecting data. So I argue that you shouldn't just flip the switch, but definitely, and it'll be in my recommendations later, is that you should start deploying the Google Analytics tracking script today in parallel with the Universal Analytics that you're currently having. And that solves a few problems for you. One is it starts getting you data now, but second is it allows you to continue using the tools that you are comfortable and familiar with Universal Analytics while you start the process of transitioning to Google Analytics 4. Like myself, I actually opened two tabs, one with Universal Analytics view and the second with the Google Analytics 4 view, and just sort of what I'm used to and know and love, which is Universal Analytics, and then I sort of compare what the thinking is in Google Analytics 4 and try to answer the questions. That's usually why I'm in Google Analytics, is there's specific questions I'm trying to answer, and I know how to get those answers out of the Universal Analytics view, so I need to sort of retrain myself and what's the thinking for GA4, so I actually run them in parallel. So what's changing, and really and again, I believe that what pushed Google over the edge on this is GDPR and the focus on privacy. And so Google Analytics 4, there's no longer going to be any visibility to IP addresses, because that's, again, that's a user identifiable attribute that is against GDPR. And something for the folks in the EU that really know this is this concept of subject access requests and forget me requests, which is basically, you know, delete the data you know about me. They've made it a lot easier for you to delete data out of Google Analytics with GA4. And something else that, again, the folks in the EU know about very well is the data retention policies. In other words, how long, you know, it's fine to collect data and keep data, but you have to be able to, you know, state, you can't say I'm collecting all data. You have to say, this is how long I'm keeping the data for, and this is why I'm keeping the data. So there's now, with Google Analytics 4, there are data retention options similar to, and I'll talk about that in ActiveDEMAND. We've had that for some time, is the ability to set your data retention options, handle forget me requests and subject access requests, etc. And you also have a lot more options now for turning off location specific data or the type of things you're tracking. So again, this will be aligned for those folks in the EU, will be aligned with your privacy policy that you are presenting to your clients on your website. So you can specifically state what you're collecting, and if you don't have a good reason for why you're collecting specific things, then you have the options of turning this off in Google Analytics 4. And there's a big change as well in Google Analytics 4 is that there's as you know, years ago, the only web asset was the website, but now there's multiple assets. You know, for example, apps, phone apps, right? Like a lot of companies have phone apps, so there's this whole customer engagement through the phone app, and there's also customer engagement through the Chrome browser and the website. So really, there wasn't an easy way to handle these two things separately in Google Universal Analytics. So now they've come up with this concept of data streams where you can individually segment the streams, like app and website, or app and website. So this is kind of a nice addition to the GA4. Now, on the left here, Universal Analytics, we all know this left menu item, and I'm sure we've, it's been burned in our brains from clicking and getting data from this, the reports section of Universal Analytics. So this has changed significantly, not significantly, but there's some names that have changed, and their approach has changed. So over here on the left, it's a case that acquisition is still called acquisition. A lot of the things we are getting at the behaviors are now viewed under engagement, and this whole conversions concept is sort of wrapped up into monetization in Google Analytics 4. And audience, this here is sort of moved into, and I'll talk about this user thing, which is demographics, et cetera, the user views. So the menus shifted around, and also some of the, as you will see, some of the philosophies have changed as well. So the biggest change, and this is actually, I'm very excited about this, is everything is events, right? So before, there was all these different metrics, like, you know, page views, events, transactions, views, all of this type of stuff, sessions, whatever. All of this stuff were unique objects in Universal Analytics, but with Google Analytics 4, everything's an event, right? So there was this little hidden thing called an event down in Universal Analytics, and this has become the fundamental object in Google Analytics 4. And I'll talk about this later. It's now very much aligned with how ActiveDEMAND has always been structured, right? Is that there's really these prospect events, there's prospects and what the prospects do. And the object of what they do in Google Analytics is called an event. And in ActiveDEMAND, we called it histories, and we are going to be changing the naming to be more aligned with Google Analytics 4 to actually call them events. So everything is an event in Google Analytics 4. So the two fundamental objects that are in Google Analytics 4 is really the event, which has a name and a bunch of custom parameters, right? So it gives you a lot of flexibility in defining your own events with this object model. And it also makes it a lot simpler to sort of slice and dice the data, because again, this fundamental object of what customers are doing is an event, and second is users, right? So it's not visitors, it is this user object, right? So it's really a user is doing things, which are the things they're doing are events, right? So the user can be defined with, again, just a user ID and some custom attributes, and the events, the things that the prospects, or the individuals do it's an event that they're doing it. So this is how, and I'll talk about this later, is that this is always how this ActiveDEMAND has been built from the ground up on this concept since day one. So it's sort of a breath of fresh air for us here, because it's a case that we've always trying to align the things that we're doing with the big dog, which is Google. But when we started building ActiveDEMAND, we had these two fundamental concepts: users and what the users do at our core. But we've sort of had to, I don't know, view it in different ways when we're trying to connect, what we're seeing in ActiveDEMAND versus what is being seen in the Universal Anonymous Data Aggregation tool, Google Analytics. So it's a case that right now, definitely Google Analytics 4 is out, and it's a case that the views are there. You can access the data in Google Analytics today, but the APIs, though, are still a work in progress. And for vendors like us, this is a bit of a scary thing, because Google is famous for even some of the stuff that they've released and just carpets pulled out. No, it doesn't exist anymore. So when it's the case that it's in the status that it is now, is that the APIs, which we rely on to get data out of the system, are in alpha. It's really what alpha is stating is that it code to this at your own risk, right? So it's a case that for us, when we spend money on engaging with APIs, if they change the APIs, there's no guarantee the change is minor. It could be a fundamental shift in how the APIs behave. So it's complete. It's sort of a it's a gamble. Definitely, it's a gamble. But at the end of the day, is we recognize that the importance of Google Analytics to our core business, and definitely to you. So we are, and I'll talk about this in a few slides, we are already coding against the APIs and taking the risk of Google changing those APIs and us having to redo the work. So now I'll talk about how this relates to ActiveDEMAND and this change with Google Analytics 4. So right now, today, you can, right in the configuration settings, you can add both the Universal Analytics and the Google Analytics 4 elements. And it's the case that we will automatically inject the tracking scripts on all of our landing pages. So today it's a case that if you do take my recommendation of running Universal Analytics and Google Analytics 4 in parallel, it's very simple in the ActiveDEMAND account settings to add both and to be able to track both without having to do anything to the landing pages that you're using today. So we support Google Analytics 4 tracking and Universal Analytics tracking, and doing it simultaneously. Now, we've always had this ability to we'd post events when somebody submits a form or somebody calls one of our call tracking numbers. And those events that we were posting were, of course, Universal Analytics events with the label, category, value, etc. And so what we're doing today is we're posting both the Universal Analytics, if you enable it in the account settings. We are posting both the Universal Analytics events and the Google Analytics 4 events for form submits and phone calls, just like we were doing in the past. So we're taking this approach of posting to both so that you have all this data available to you. Now, we've also created I know some of the advanced users on the call here today have used our Google Analytics post-event workflow action. And oh boy, our lead processing workflows, et cetera, we use this so much, right? Because we just bounce stuff off Google Analytics and then do our custom report widgets on our dashboards and our scheduled reports using these events for our reporting. We have introduced a post Google Analytics 4 event object, and it literally is mirroring what these, again, like I showed you a few slides ago, the two elements are the user properties and the event parameters. So you can use dynamic terms in the event object, just like you could with the Universal Analytics event object. And you can put the name, label, value pairs, not only hard coding like I'm doing here, but you can also inject dynamic terms for pulling off from the context of the workflow. You can push dynamic terms into the user properties or the event parameters today. So what we do in our account is we don't, like in the previous slide, and I'll just go back to it, ourselves, we actually don't check this checkbox, because on this we use the custom event objects everywhere, right? So that we have full control over the metadata model of the events as they're posting into Google Analytics. So in our account today, it's a case that we have, and I'll show you in a couple of slides, we actually have post to one and then post to the other. So we are posting in our account to both simultaneously. So this allows us to still get all the reporting that we love from Google Universal Analytics, and as well, it's preparing us for the switch over to the full switch over when Google Analytics 4 is the only way. So it's a case that if we think about ActiveDEMAND and how ActiveDEMAND tracks versus how Google Analytics 4 tracks, and I mentioned this earlier, is that it's now very closely aligned, right? Because basically in our system, we start off by tracking an anonymous visitor as a contact, an anonymous contact. And so there's this concept of a contact record. And then there's the history or the event history of that contact. So we're tracking it from anonymity all the way through the entire buyer journey. So it's really these two fundamental objects in ActiveDEMAND, which are history events. And the second one is the contact objects. So those correlate directly with the same object concepts, which is in Google Analytics 4 events and users. So there's very nice alignment between the two as with this new shift to Google Analytics 4. And in our platform, we do have this concept of goals. And we also have a concept of conversions. I think conversions are now with Google Analytics 4 a lot more are analogous to what it is in Google Analytics 4. But for us, goals are the very precise context of what we're trying to get a prospect to do, and what is the line that they have to cross for them to have completed a goal. So in our platform, goals have been the big object for some time. We have crazy capabilities in our platform for defining these goals and measuring these goals. So again, I think the object models for ActiveDEMAND and Google Analytics and the shift to Google Analytics 4 is there's very nice alignment in concepts. Whereas with Universal Analytics, it was you had to sort of think, look at everything from a certain view to, oh, I see what ActiveDEMAND is doing. I see what Google Analytics, Universal Analytics is doing, but and how they correlate just from metaphors, I guess is the word. But yeah, now the alignment is fantastic. So today, like I said, we're doing the tracking. We have the custom event object that you can post events to, and what's currently in development is the custom widget builder, like we have with the Google Analytics, Universal Analytics data set. And also, we'll be providing a standard set of Google Analytics 4 widgets, similar to what we're doing today with Universal Analytics. And really, the timeline on this, it's really, again, it's this what APIs are Google exposing so we can get the data, and second is how again, this gamble thing is whether or not that the way they're presenting it to us today, is that going to change? So we are doing the gamble, but the reality is, with the current status of the APIs, not everything is accessible like it was with Universal Analytics. So our widget builder and our standard widgets really have been held up by us waiting for Google to expose the APIs that allow us to replicate the concepts we had with Universal Analytics widgets. So again, the recommendations here, as I mentioned earlier, is do both, right? Do both in parallel right now, right? For every single account, even your new web assets, do both. Put in the universal tracking script as well as the tracking capabilities, tracking system for GA4. And anywhere you're using, especially in your account templates or your lead processing workflows, et cetera, and now we actually introduced a specific workflow, which is the Google event posting workflow that you're seeing in a lot of accounts today. My recommendation is do both. Post both the GA4 event and the Google event so that you can leverage the existing widgets in your reporting and dashboards with Universal Analytics, and then have some great historical data when the transition occurs to the GA4 reporting. And really, again, the philosophy of our approach with Google Analytics versus ActiveDEMAND has not changed. Like, if we think about Google Analytics, it is really a fantastic anonymous data aggregation platform. So it's really now, through the evolution of Google Analytics, they started getting closer to the contact, but with GDPR and some of these privacy concerns, it's a case they're backing away from it, right? So it's still absolutely fantastic for anonymous data aggregation, but it's becoming more true. The statement that I've always said is the closer you get to the individual in Google Analytics, the less they're going to give you, right? And that's purely because of litigation and privacy concerns, that because really the challenge Google has is there, and this is really what everyone's up in arms about, is the ability to track across web assets, right? Being able to track based on the device and track on the, they know so much about us. And if they start handing that data out to everybody, they put themselves in a pretty big pickle, right? Because sharing data is really the, and I think Google's done very well on privacy. Like, if you look at the approach Google has had with vis-a-vis Facebook, right? Facebook is, yeah, we got all the data, here it is. We don't care about privacy. We're happy to give marketers what we have. And of course, there's been a big mess as a result of that. But Google, their approach has always been very good in how they've approached sharing data, right? And how they've approached, like, even matched audiences. You need like 1,000 matches on a record that you have before they'll start changing ads. Whereas I think with Facebook, it's 20 is the match limit. So really, yeah, the role that we see, and we've always saw with Google Analytics, is leave the anonymous data aggregation to Google Analytics and leverage what Google Analytics has done. And then with ActiveDEMAND, the closer you get to the user, the more data we have. So it's really about true user tracking. So because we are not tracking, across, or I should say, you're not tracking across domains. Every domain is its own independent object, or I should say, account in ActiveDEMAND. If people are walking in your house, you're free to record them, record what they're doing, and track the people, as long as, again, you're telling people what you're tracking, why you're tracking it, and give them options to opt out, and be able to, in the EU and other countries, be able to honor subject access requests and forget-me requests. So that we absolutely do in spades. It's a case that we can fully automate and audit the whole tracking process. We give you the tools to control your data retention policies, set your data retention policies, and automate subject access requests and forget-me requests. But at the end of the day, the real strength of ActiveDEMAND has and will continue to be tracking buyer journeys, being able to track somebody from first touch on the website all the way through when they purchase, what they continue to do through retention, expansion, upsell, cross-sell, etc. We absolutely are about giving attribution on the funnel, giving attribution on the revenue, and giving you full visibility into what users are doing. So there's a nice dovetail between the two, power in anonymous data aggregation with Google Analytics and user tracking in ActiveDEMAND. So yeah, summary, UA has 1 year left in data collection. Take advantage of it. That's my recommendation. You're used to how Google Analytics, Universal Analytics works today. So take advantage of it right till the end. And GA4 is Google's, in my opinion, response to privacy and litigation. And I think it's a fantastic response, right? I think what they've done with Google Analytics 4 is really good. And I think the fact of the matter here is, absolutely, whether you like it or not, we're all moving to Google Analytics 4, and that move will have to be completed by July of next year. And from our perspective, we've hitched our wagon to Google years ago, and we've always had a nice strategy of aligning how we approach things and how Google approaches things, from terminology, the metaphors of how we engage with contacts, and this type of stuff has been, we've tried to align earlier, but now with the move to GA4, it's a lot closer in how they view things as compared to how we've always viewed things. So it's those two fundamental objects, a user and the things and the events or the things that the prospects do that we're measuring. So Google Analytics 4 support in ActiveDEMAND is here today. So I say take advantage of it, and again, do this in parallel. Shift over to adding both scripts, but definitely consider using our custom event objects if you're not using them already. Use both, and use them in parallel so that you're getting the Google Analytics, Universal Analytics data into Google Analytics, the Universal Analytics view, but also think about the strategy on event naming and the data model for events that you want to go forward with into the future, and the user metadata model you're looking in Google Analytics GA4. Again, define these things and leverage our workflow actions to replicate your thinking with the data we're collecting on users and pushing it into Google Analytics. Now, something to note and be very careful on this, and it's is Google Analytics' terms of services are very clear, is that you cannot push user data, like for example, Bob Smith or Bob from Acme, or here's Bob's phone number into Google Analytics. So even though you have access to the merge fields in to post to Google Analytics, stay away from posting data that somebody else could come in and say, that's, I see Bob Smith, you're storing user information in Google Analytics. You can post our IDs because, and that's part of the fundamental part of Google Analytics 4 is being able to cross-platform track individuals. But again, it's got to be something that a third party can't look at, say, XJ123, hey, that's Fred, that's Fred Smith from Scranton. All right, it's the IDs are fine to post is the idea. So think about the metadata you're looking to push into Google Analytics, and don't cross that line of user identifiable information in Google Analytics. But hey, ActiveDEMAND is built from the ground up to be creating a rich data model for the individuals and providing with dynamic content, dynamic emails, etc. The shortening buyer journeys and providing value to your clients through the buying process. So that is it.